In the heart of Provence, nestled between rolling hills of lavender and sun-baked stone cottages, lies the small village of Saint-Julien. The year is 1942. The world beyond these fields is at war, but here life moves at the measured pace of seasons, of chores, of handwritten letters carried from one hand to another. This is the story of Madame Élodie Faure, the village postmistress, and the quiet rhythms of her days. Each morning, just as the first light spills over the horizon, Madame Faure rises from her narrow bed, the linen sheets worn soft with years of use. Her small house, attached to the post office, is simple but sturdy. Whitewashed walls, a terracotta tiled floor cool beneath her feet, and a hearth where a copper kettle waits to be filled. She dresses methodically, a high-collared blouse of pale cotton, a wool skirt dyed the color of faded violets, and a well-mended apron with pockets deep enough for letters and lavender sprigs. Before opening the post office, she prepares a pot of chamomile tea, the steam curling into the crisp morning air. The ritual is always the same: a spoonful of honey, a slice of yesterday's rye bread spread with goat cheese from old Monsieur Lefebvre's farm. She eats slowly, watching through the window as the village stirs, the baker's son sweeping flour from the doorstep, Madame Girard airing out her quilts on the balcony, the distant clang of the blacksmith's hammer. At precisely 7 o'clock she unlocks the post office, a narrow room with a counter of polished oak, its surface worn smooth by generations of hands. Behind her, cubbies line the wall, each labeled in careful script: Paris, Lyon, Marseille, and of course, Saint-Julien. The air smells of ink, wax, and the faintest trace of lavender sachets tucked between envelopes. The first task is always sorting. Letters arrive in bundles tied with twine, their edges sometimes frayed from travel. Madame Faure handles each one with care. Her fingers traces postmarks and addresses. Some are official, permits, notices from the prefecture, but most are personal. A son's letter from the north, a sister's recipe shared between towns, a love note folded small enough to hide in a palm. There is a rhythm to this work, a quiet certainty. The scratch of her pen, the press of the seal, the way she tucks each letter into its proper place. Outside, the village goes about its day, but here time moves as it always has. One letter, one breath, one moment at a time. The morning sun climbs higher over Saint-Julien, warming the cobblestones and casting long shadows from the plane trees in the square. Inside the post office, Madame Faure works steadily, her hands moving with the quiet precision of someone who has done this for decades. The inkwell at her elbow is nearly full, a deep brown liquid she prepares herself each fortnight from walnuts gathered in the orchard behind the church. Walnut ink is a tradition here. In late summer, when the green husks split open, the village children collect them in woven baskets, staining their fingers dark as they peel away the bitter flesh. Madame Faure boils the husks with rainwater and a pinch of iron salts, straining the mixture through muslin till it flows like silk. The result is an ink that ages beautifully, fading from sepia to a soft, smoky gray, as if the letters themselves are breathing with time. As she stamps another envelope, the bell above the door jingles. It's young Sophie, the schoolmaster's daughter, here to post a letter to her aunt in Avignon. The girl stands on tiptoe to peer over the counter, her braids tied with scraps of blue ribbon. Madame Faure smiles. and offers her a peppermint from the tin she keeps for children, a small sweetness in a world that often forgets such things. The post office is more than a place for letters. It's where news is shared in whispers, where neighbors linger under the pretense of mailing a parcel. Old Madame Durand comes in with a bundle of lavender tied with string, tucking it beside the inkwell to keep the air fresh. The scent mingles with the oakwood shelves, the beeswax polish rubbed into the counter each Friday, the faint metallic tang of the franking machine. Just before noon, the sound of hooves echoes in the square. It's Henry, the regional courier, his bicycle replaced these days by a horse-drawn cart. Petrol is too scarce. He brings the midday mail, a packet of newspapers from Lyon, a parcel wrapped in brown paper and twine, a handful of field post letters for families waiting on word from sons and husbands. Madame Faure sorts them without reading the addresses aloud. Some things need no announcement. Henri stays long enough to share a cup of barley coffee, bitter but warming, sweetened with a spoonful of chestnut honey. They speak of the weather, of the lavender harvest coming soon, of how the baker has managed to make passable bread despite the rationing. No mention of war, of soldiers, of distant thunder, just the small, steadfast things that keep a village alive. After Henri leaves, Madame Faure prepares her own lunch, a bowl of soup au pistou made with yesterday's broth, a few wilted greens, and the last of the summer's basil. She eats at the little table by the window, watching the square empty as families retreat for the midday rest. The post office will close for an hour, as it always does. The letters can wait. Even in occupied France, there is still time for silence. The post office reopens as the church bell strikes 2, its bronze tone rolling slowly through the heat-heavy air. Madame Faure pins back the shutters to let in what breeze there is, the hinges sighing like an old friend. This is the quiet hour, when farmers rest beneath the linden trees and even the chickens seek shade, but there is always work to be done. In the back room, where the air is cool and smells faintly of dust and dried herbs, Madame Faure keeps her mending basket. The canvas mail sacks need repair today, their seams frayed from rough handling. She threads a needle with sturdy flaxen thread, the motion as practiced as her handwriting. The thimble she uses was her mother's, its silver worn thin on one side from decades of use. As she stitches, her mind drifts to the ledger book waiting on her desk. Each village postmistress keeps one, a record of every letter sent, every parcel received. Hers is bound in cracked leather, its pages edged in red. The entries are written in her looping script with notes in the margins. M. Fournier's spectacles sent to Clermont-Ferrand. Genevieve's birthday parcel delayed by snow. These small details are the true history of Saint-Julien. Outside, the village stirs back to life. The rasp of a saw comes from the carpenter's workshop. Madame Brisset shakes out rugs from her upstairs window. The scent of anise drifts from the cafe where old men play boules in the dust. A few customers wander into the post office. A farmer's wife mailing a jar of quince preserves to her sister. The school teacher collecting a package of chalk wrapped in newspaper. Among the afternoon's tasks is the sorting of the dead letter bin, envelopes with smudged addresses or long abandoned hopes. Madame Faure handles each with care, sometimes holding them to the light to decipher a faded word. When she can, she returns them to their senders. When she cannot, She tucks them into the ledger's back pages, where they rest like pressed flowers between the lines of someone else's story. As the shadows lengthen, she prepares the evening mail for Henry's collection. Each letter is weighed on the brass scale, its postage calculated with the tiny, careful stamps that she keeps in a lacquered box. The franking machine presses its mark into the paper, a crisp black oval with the date and Saint Julien in proud letters. Even now, even here, there is order in this small ritual. The last task of the day is to sweep the floor. The broom is made of twigs bound with willow, the kind that leaves faint streaks on the tiles, like the tracks of birds in snow. As she works, motes of dust rise into the slanting light, swirling as lazily as the thoughts that drift through her mind. The lavender needing to be cut tomorrow, the jar of honey she promised to old Père Michaud, the way the poplar leaves outside turn silver when the wind blows. As the sun dips behind the church steeple, casting the square in long blue shadows, Madame Four begins her evening rituals. The post office must be put to bed just as carefully as it is woken. Each item returned to its proper place, each task completed with the quiet satisfaction of work well done. First, she covers the inkwell with a little circle of linen to keep the dust out. The pens are wiped clean with a rag dampened with vinegar, their nibs carefully aligned in the porcelain holder shaped like a nesting dove. The day's receipts are tallied in the ledger, not in francs, which change value like the wind, but in the older way. How many letters sent, how many parcels received, how many stamps sold. Numbers that still mean what they always have. The key to the post office is heavy iron, worn smooth by 3 generations of hands. She turns it in the lock with both hands, the mechanism clicking like a satisfied cricket. Through the window, she can see the cafe across the square lighting its lanterns, not the bright electric ones of before the war, but the old oil lamps that paint the walls in flickering amber. Her own house smells of the pot of leek and potato soup simmering on the stove, thickened with a handful of barley, a single bay leaf floating on the surface like a tiny boat. While it cooks, she changes into her evening attire, a faded indigo dressing gown patched at the elbows, woolen socks knit from undyed yarn, comfortable things, worn soft by years of use. Supper is eaten at the small table by the hearth, with a slice of dark bread rubbed with garlic, just enough to taste, not enough to waste. The soup bowl is the same pale blue porcelain she's used since girlhood, its rim decorated with tiny cornflowers. As she eats, she listens to the evening sounds, the rattle of carts returning from fields, the murmur of neighbors sharing news, the occasional bark of a dog echoing down the narrow streets. After supper comes the mending. In the circle of light from her oil lamp, she darns a pair of stockings stretched over a wooden egg. The yarn is unraveled from an old sweater. Nothing is thrown away these days. Her stitches are nearly invisible, a skill learned during the last war when new clothes were just as hard to come by. The rhythm of the needle is meditative. In, out, pull, turn. In, out, pull, turn. On the shelf above her, a row of jars glows in the lamplight, each filled with something saved for harder times. Dried lavender heads, a handful of hazelnuts, a precious square of chocolate wrapped in wax paper, and at the end, an empty jar labeled Lavender Honey, Summer 1940. She keeps it as a reminder that sweetness always returns in its own time. Before bed, She stands at the open window for a long moment, breathing in the cool night air scented with wood smoke and the first hint of dew on time. Somewhere in the dark, an owl calls. Somewhere farther still, the war goes on. But here, now, there is only this: the weight of a well-worn quilt, the whisper of linen sheets, the knowledge that tomorrow will begin as today did, with the turning of a key, the sorting of letters, the quiet keeping of a village's heart. The village still sleeps when Madame Four wakes. Somewhere beyond the shuttered windows, the last stars cling to the fading night sky. She rises without a candle. Her hands know these rooms as well as they know the weight of a letter or the texture of good paper. The floorboards sigh underfoot as she moves through the dark, guided by memory and the faintest glow now seeping through the east-facing window. Before opening the post office, there is the morning toilette to complete. At the washstand she pours water from the pitcher, cold enough to make her catch her breath, and scrubs her face with a square of linen soap. The mirror above this basin is old and speckled, but it shows enough. A woman of 52, her dark hair streaked with silver and pinned back in the same simple twist she's worn since girlhood. Her work dress waits on the chair, pressed under a heavy book overnight to keep the seams straight. The fabric is a practical navy serge, the collar fastened with a cameo that belonged to her grandmother. As she buttons the cuffs, she can hear the first birds beginning their morning chorus, sparrows in the eaves, a blackbird singing from the churchyard yew. Downstairs, she lights the stove with last night's embers and a few precious sticks of kindling. The coffee is not really coffee at all, roasted chicory and ground acorns, but the ritual is comforting nonetheless. While it brews, she slices yesterday's bread and spreads it with a scrape of preserves made from last summer's wild plums. The first bite is always taken standing at the window, watching as the village emerges from shadow. Across the square, lanterns flicker to life in the bakery. Young Jacques, the baker's apprentice, emerges flour-dusted and yawning to sweep the front step. The metallic clang of milk can signals old man Bernard's arrival from the dairy farm. And high above, the church bell tolls 5 times, each note vibrating through the cool air like a stone dropped into still water. As she unlocks the post office, something unusual waits. A single envelope slipped beneath the door during the night. No stamp, no postmark, just a name written in careful block letters. Madame, Villette L'Eglantine. The paper is of poor quality, the kind used for ration books. Madame Four holds it to the light, but does not open it. Some messages are not meant for postmistresses, only for their hands to carry forward. The rest of the morning routine continues as always. The inkwell is uncovered. The pen nibs are checked. The day's ledger page is dated in her neat script, 16 Juin 1942. But as she works, her eyes keep returning to that drawer. In Saint-Julien, everyone knows that Les Glycines is not really a house, but the code name for the old mill where the resistance meets. And everyone knows, too, that some knowledge is safer, left unspoken. The village wakes. The post office opens. The day begins as days always do. But beneath the surface of these ordinary moments, other currents flow, quiet as ink, soaking into paper, steady as a needle pulling thread through fabric, patient as lavender, waiting to bloom. Mid-morning settles over Saint-Julien like a well-worn shawl. The post office hums with quiet activity. the shuffle of envelopes being sorted, the occasional creak of the door as villagers come and go. Madame Four moves between tasks with practiced ease, her hands never still but never rushed. This is the hour when the ordinary rhythms of village life reveal their quiet poetry. On the counter sits a basket of lavender cuttings from Madame Thierry's garden. The stems are freshly dried, their fragrance released in tiny purple bursts as Madame Four rubs them between her palms. She carefully tucks small bundles into muslin squares, scraps from old flour sacks, washed soft as linen, tying each with thread to make sachets. These will be placed in the letter drawers to keep moths away and leave a trace of summer on every envelope. Old Père Michaud arrives precisely at 10, as he has every Tuesday for 20 years to collect his newspaper. His gnarled hands unfold Le Petit Provençal with ceremonial slowness, smoothing the pages against the counter as he reads the headlines in a low mutter. Today's news speaks of railway repairs and harvest forecasts, nothing of troop movements or curfews. The war exists here only in the margins, in the advertisements for substitute coffee, and the sudden gaps where certain columns used to appear. Next comes little Claire with her weekly letter to her brother at the boarding school in X. The envelope is decorated with clumsy but earnest drawings, a stick figure cat, something that might be a sunflower. Madame Four weighs it with deliberate ceremony, pretending not to notice when Claire stands on tiptoe to add 2 extra stamps for luck. Some traditions are too precious to question. Between customers, Madame Four tends to the potted geranium on the windowsill. Its soil is a special mixture: crushed eggshells saved from breakfast, coffee grounds dried on a tray, a handful of sand from the riverbank. She waters it with rainwater collected in the copper cistern, pouring slowly so as not to disturb the roots. The plant has bloomed continuously since 1938, its stubborn cheerfulness a silent rebuke to troubled times. At 11:30, the widow Aubrey arrives with her customary parcel, knitted socks destined for her son in the prisoner of war camp. The package is always the same weight, always wrapped in the same brown paper, tied with kitchen string. And always, always, Madame Four presses the wax seal with extra care, as if the strength of her fingers could somehow will it safely across borders and barbed wire. As noon approaches, the flow of customers slows. Sunlight pools on the oak counter, highlighting the whorls and knots in the wood. Centuries of growth captured in a single surface. Madame Four runs her palm across the grain, feeling the ridges where generations of postmistresses before her have leaned while counting out change or comforting a worried mother. The wood remembers, and so, in her own way, does she. The morning slips away like sand through an hourglass, each ordinary moment precious precisely because it is ordinary. Another letter weighed, another stamp licked, another life touched lightly, then released back into the stream of the day. The post office settles into its afternoon quiet, that golden hour when even the flies grow drowsy against the window panes. With the midday meal finished and the shutters half closed against the sun, Madame Four turns to tasks that require no conversation, only the steady companionship of her own thoughts and the whisper of paper beneath her fingers. The leather mailbag needs attention, its strap worn thin from months of carrying hope and heartache across the countryside. She works beeswax into the cracked hide with the rounded end of a thimble, the motion slow and circular. This is the same bag her father used when he was postmaster, its leather imprinted with the memory of his shoulder. Sometimes, when the light falls just so, she can still see the faint impression where his pipe used to nestle in the side pocket. On the counter lies yesterday's dead letter, a birthday card addressed simply to Pierre Saint-Julien, with no surname or street. The envelope is edged in cheerful blue stripes, the inks slightly smudged as if written in haste. Madame Faure examines it as she does all strays, holding it to the light, testing the weight of it in her palm. After 30 years, she knows most villagers' hands by their penmanship alone. This one, she decides, belongs to the new family at the old Dumont farm. Their boy's 8th birthday was last week. She prepares a fresh label, mixing her ink with a drop of lavender oil to keep the nib from catching. Her handwriting is its own kind of artistry, each downstroke confident, each flourish restrained. When she ties the redirected letter with a bit of twine, she adds a sprig of dried lavender from her apron pocket. Small kindnesses cost nothing, yet weigh more than gold in uncertain times. Outside, the square naps in the heat. The blacksmith's hammer has fallen silent. The cafe empties as men return to fields and workshops. Only the fountain continues its endless chatter, water trickling over mossy stones into the basin where generations of village women have cooled their wrists on afternoons like this. A sudden knock at the back door breaks the stillness. 3 quick raps, a pause, then 2 more. Madame Faure doesn't startle. She simply wipes her hands on her apron and lifts the latch to reveal young Luc from the telegraph office, his bicycle leaning against the wall outside. He carries no official dispatch today, just a small parcel wrapped in oilcloth and tied with butcher's string. No postage, no return address. Only a single black thread woven through the knot, a detail most wouldn't notice. She places it unopened in the bottom drawer, beneath the old ledgers from 1938. The drawer sticks slightly warped from last winter's damp and requires just the right pressure at the upper left corner. Another thing known only to those who belong here. Tomorrow, when the widow Molyneux comes to collect her pension notice, the parcel will disappear as quietly as it arrived. The afternoon stretches on warm and honey-thick. Somewhere beyond these walls, armies march and borders shift. But here, in this moment, there is only the scent of wax and lavender, the weight of a mended mail-bag, the quiet certainty that some letters, like some secrets, will always find their way home. The golden light of late afternoon slants through the post office windows, setting the dust motes dancing. Madame Faure stands at her counter, smoothing the pages of her ledger with hands that know every crease and stain in its paper. This is her quiet reckoning, not just of stamps and parcels, but of the day's small human transactions, each one a stitch in the fabric of Saint-Julien. The entries are made in her usual code, not the official one from the Postal Service manual, but her own private cipher. A tiny lavender dot beside Monsieur Fournier's name means his son's letter from the front arrived safely. A faint pencil cross next to Madame Lefebvre's parcel marks it as containing hidden coffee beans beneath the layer of knitted socks. The ledger tells truths the occupation authorities would never think to look for between columns of numbers and dates. Outside, the chestnut seller wheels his cart across the cobbles, the iron-shod wheels clattering like distant gunfire. The scent of roasting nuts drifts through the half-open door, a luxury few can afford now, but the smell alone is a kind of sustenance. Madame Faure counts out the day's stamps, her fingers moving automatically as she listens to the village settling into evening. Shutters being fastened, chickens being called home, the metallic ring of a hoe being cleaned at the water pump. The last customer of the day is young Father Mathieu, stopping to collect the diocesan newsletter. His cassock smells of incense and the waxy polish used on church pews. They speak of harmless things, the upcoming grape harvest, the need for a new bell rope, while their eyes exchange the messages that matter. When he leaves, a slim volume of Psalms remains on the counter, a scrap of paper marking Psalm 91. You will not fear the terror of night. She tucks it under the blotter without reading further. Some promises need no words. Closing time brings its own rituals. The inkwell is sealed with a drop of wax. The pen nibs are rinsed in a glass of vinegar water. The floor is swept with the old broom made of chestnut twigs, its bristles leaving faint arcs in the dust like the tracks of a shy animal. As she works, the lavender sachets in the drawers release their last fragrance of the day, a scent that will linger on her hands as she prepares supper. Tonight, she has a guest, old Doctor Roussel, who comes every Thursday to share his meager ration of tobacco and the latest news gleaned from his hidden wireless. Their meal is simple, a soup of leeks and the last of the winter potatoes, thickened with a handful of barley. The bread is 3 days old but softened with a drizzle of precious olive oil. They eat at the small table by the fire, speaking little. At their age, in these times, silence often carries more meaning than speech. Later, after the doctor has gone home with his pockets full of carefully folded bulletins, Madame Faure stands at her bedroom window. The village sleeps under a sky brilliant with stars the occupation hasn't dimmed. Somewhere beyond these hills, the war grinds on. But here, now, there is only the whisper of linen sheets, the sigh of the house settling around her, and the quiet certainty that tomorrow will begin as today ended, with the turning of a key, the lighting of a lamp, the keeping of faith in ordinary things. Somewhere in the deepest hour of the night, when even the owls have gone quiet, Madame Faure wakes to the sound of pebbles tapping against glass. Not the hurried rattle of alarm, but the old rhythm, 3 taps, a pause, then 2 more, that hasn't been used since her father's time. The floorboards are cool beneath her bare feet as she crosses to the window, her breath fogging the pane as she peers into the moonlit square. Below stands a figure shrouded in the shadow of the plane trees, not a villager, but someone shaped by longer roads and harder years. The glint of a bicycle propped against the fountain, the hunch of shoulders accustomed to ducking under doorways. When the stranger looks up, moonlight catches the faded scar running from eyebrow to jawline, a face she last saw in 1938, when young Etienne Bernard left for Paris to study engineering. She meets him at the post office back door without a lamp. The key turns silently. She's oiled the lock every Sunday for exactly this reason. Inside, the air smells of ink and dried lavender, the night's coolness trapped between stone walls. No words are exchanged until the door is barred behind them, until the blackout curtain is checked a second time. Some habits become a second nature in occupied France. The parcel he brings is smaller than a loaf of bread, wrapped in waxed canvas and smelling faintly of motor oil. She doesn't ask what it contains. Some questions are kinder left unspoken. Instead, she busies herself preparing the hiding place. Behind the false back of the oldest mail-sorting cubby, where the wood has been worn smooth by generations of fingers, the space fits the package like a glove. They share no embraces, no dramatic farewells. Just 2 cups of lukewarm chamomile tea, the remains of the evening's pot, and a slice of yesterday's chestnut bread. The young man eats like someone who's forgotten the taste of home. His hands, when they brush hers passing the cup, are scratched raw from brambles and rough work. Not an engineer's hands anymore. When he leaves just before dawn, he takes nothing with him but a letter, one she wrote yesterday in careful loops and coded phrases, to be carried northward. No stamp marks this envelope, no official seal, only a sprig of lavender tucked into the fold because old habits persist even in war. Madame Four watches from the window as the bicycle disappears down the alley behind the charcuterie. The first birds are beginning to sing, their notes threading through the fading dark. In an hour, she'll rise as usual to open the post office. The villagers will come for their letters and newspapers. The lavender sachets will scent the morning air, and no one will notice how the third cubby from the left, the one marked Leon, bears a fresh scratch near its base, or how the postmistress' hands linger there just a moment longer than necessary when sorting the mail. Dawn breaks over Saint-Julien in shades of lavender and gold. The first sickle of sunlight cuts across the village square, gilding the fountain's patinaed copper, setting the dewdrops ablaze on Madame Girard's kitchen herbs. Inside the post office, Madame Four lights her morning candle, not because she needs it to see, but because the flame itself is a kind of prayer these days. The wax is beeswax from Père Michaud's hives, the wick spun from last summer's flax. Even the light here is made of memories. Today is the lavender harvest. Through the window, she watches the women of the village move toward the fields, their wide-brimmed hats tied under their chins with scraps of ribbon. Their scythes flash in the rising light, blades kept sharp since last season with river stones and careful hands. The air already hums with bees drunk on nectar, their legs heavy with pollen, the color of twilight. The post office opens later than usual on harvest days. There are rituals to observe first. The laying out of the special ledger used only for harvest season, the wrapping of the scales in muslin to keep dust from settling in the mechanisms. Madame Four takes extra care with her appearance today, her best linen blouse, the cameo at her collar polished with vinegar until the carved profile gleams. Even in war, some traditions demand respect. When the villagers come, as they always do, between morning cutting and afternoon bundling, they bring offerings from the fields, a sprig of lavender tucked into the ledger, a small sachet left beside the inkwell. Old Madame Thierry presents a jar of this year's first honey, still warm from the hives. The post office fills with the scent of it, golden and herbaceous, mingling with the tang of iron gall ink and the faint musk of old paper. The letters processed today are different from usual. Harvest notices to cousins in neighboring villages, parcels of lavender buds pressed between pages of newsprint, a postcard to a prisoner of war camp featuring a generic landscape, but the stamp is placed upside down, and the postmark deliberately smudged. These are the codes that matter now, written in the language of ordinary things. At midday, the whole village gathers in the square. Tables appear, as if by magic, draped in patched linens. There's bread, made from the last of the pre-war flour, a wheel of cheese smuggled from the high pastures, jars of pickled vegetables glowing like jewels. The children play tag around the plane trees while their mothers compare scythe blisters and their fathers speak in low tones about the weather, the crops, everything except the war. Madame Four sits between the schoolteacher and the blacksmith's widow, sipping cider that tastes of autumn even in high summer. In her lap rests a letter that arrived this morning, the handwriting achingly familiar, the postmark blurred beyond recognition. She doesn't open it. Not yet. Some joys are best savored in anticipation, like the last jar of preserves saved for a special occasion. As evening falls, she walks home through streets scented with cut lavender. The bundles hang upside down from every balcony, drying in the sun's last warmth. At her doorstep, she pauses to watch the bats emerge from the church belfry, their flight erratic as cursive, written in the dark. Inside, the unopened letter waits on the kitchen table beside a single candle. Outside, the first fireflies blink their tiny lanterns against the gathering dark. The war will end. The lavender will bloom again. And through it all, the letters will keep coming, carrying secrets and love and the quiet courage of ordinary lives lived with extraordinary care. Somewhere, a postmistress lights a candle. Somewhere, a letter finds its way home.